Good afternoon, everybody. May have a good lunch, a couple of cocktails. You're ready to go for the afternoon. We've got a big trade show later on. My name's Mickey Jacob, and I have the honor and pleasure of introducing our next speaker, David Zock, the Futurist. And so welcome to the future this afternoon. We're very, very lucky to have him with us today and his presentation skills, although I think the luck is really his that the Department of Florida Law Enforcement lifted the restraining order so he could be with us today. But David has a unique background as a futurist, and he's been doing these presentations for 40 years-ish or so. And I also had the pleasure of having David on my board of directors when I served as the AIA National President. And by the way, you beat out the candidate that I had put up for public director that year, so I don't hold grudges, but yeah, I do. He brought a perspective that I don't think the National Board had ever had before, because no matter what the discussion was, David always asked the question, why? Why are you doing this? Why do you behave that way? Why do we do these things? Why aren't we doing it differently? Why aren't we looking at ways to do it better? So he's the greatest proponent of using the word why, and also his presentation. If you were there yesterday and saw what he does, David engages. He's energetic, he's enthusiastic, and he brought that to the AIA Board of Directors, and he's been involved with the AIA for a long time. We've all loved having him with us, and he's also not afraid of a cocktail drink. I can verify that particular situation as well. But he's going to talk to us today about process, skills, and notions, and so I'm excited to see what he has to say. I'm sure he's going to be fun, entertaining, provocative, and put another adjective in there at the end, whatever you want. Ladies and gentlemen, David Zock.
Thank you, sir. Hi there, welcome back. And first of all, I just want to thank you for the reception I got for my talk yesterday. That was really nice. It had been, I think, like 2016 was my last live AIA presentation. And, I did a few of them online, the Zoom talks. I don't want to ever do one of those ever again, because you can't see the reaction. I mean, we are not meant to be alone. And it's great to see you in real person here. Okay. I've done this before, particularly for AIS students when I would speak at Forum. And I did that like five times, which was really, they are my absolute favorite audience I have ever been in front of. They were just so much fun and so curious, and the conversations we would have afterwards. What I was asked to do with this one is bring in a little bit of my process of how do I think? How do I pull these ideas together? And then I'm also going to just give you some hints that I've learned along the way after over 1,500 presentations, that there are clues that you pick up along the way. My real job is reading books. I just sit around and read books, but I always have a pen in hand, and usually I also have a highlighter in hand, and I've got big enough hands where I can just flip them back and forth. But a book is not finished until you've engaged the author. And Tim Parks wrote in the New York Review of Books, "There is something predatory, cruel even, about a pen suspended over a text. Like a hawk over a field, it is on the lookout for something vulnerable. The mere fact of holding the hand poised for action changes our attitude to the text. We are no longer passive consumers of a monologue, but active participants in a dialogue." So you need to sort of challenge the author and challenge yourself of what are these ideas? Where do I take them? One of the distinctions I've had as a futurist is that I would talk a lot about the past. Because when people say, that the only constant is change, Heraclitus said that 2,500 years ago. And oddly, that quotation has not changed in 2,500 years. There are some constants out there. And if everything changes, that means we have in fact learned nothing. So the question is, what do we hold on to? What do we let go of? And I try to be reasonably funny because if you can laugh at something, it isn't quite as threatening. And we all know that the future is really kind of scary right now for a whole bunch of reasons beyond just the looming question of AI. But when we can laugh at something, we see the humanity in us, and that we can rise to the occasion and solve this, figure it out, and move on to other problems. It's important when you have, if you want to read a book, like novels are on a Kindle. I can, because basically it's almost like taking a bath or a shower. You just are enjoying it. But it's amazing how often I will read novels. Like right now, I'm reading a novel about an English police detective. I haven't a clue as to who the author is. No, Jeffrey Archer. I don't know what the title is. Because I'm just enjoying the fiction. But if you're going to learn from it, then you've got to do, this interaction with it. Screens are surface. And ideas on screens are spread, books are read. To that point, Glenn Harlan Reynolds, who's a professor, in a small little book he wrote, he talked about a study that was done by Columbia University and the French National Institute and said that 59% of articles that are forwarded are not read before they're forwarded. You read the title or the first paragraph and you either totally agree with it or you hate it, and then you know who needs to see this. We also think we're smarter because we read a lot of headlines. But the research also shows that we lose a sense of empathy. And you see how, the polarization that's going on with your news sources, where we find this, and then we look over there and think that's bad. So you have to get a little bit more, dig a little deeper. Articles online on a screen tend to be skimmed, and we pay more attention to books, particularly because screens are connected to something. And how many of you, while you're reading an article, see a link and then go there, and then go there, and then go there, and you don't even remember what the original article was that got you there? Books are contained. And so there's less seductive attraction going on there. Articles tend to be summarized. Books tend to be synthesized, meaning that they're pulling in a lot of things. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm pulling in a lot of ideas. Research shows that the handwriting of sentences, as opposed to the typing of a sentence, is that when you're writing it, because there's a certain permanency to the writing, you have to think about the conclusion of the sentence. And we always know that when we're typing, we can go back and edit. So there's more thought put into it. And I was having a conversation with Mike Vassalaro this morning about how we, the authors that used to write these 800-page books would handwrite them. And then to edit it, they would rewrite the whole thing. And we can't even comprehend finishing paragraphs sometimes. Their minds were different. But we think we're better educated. We are better educated. We're not smarter. And then also, paper is sensual. It's sensory. They say, like, when you're reading a book, just knowing where you are on the page and where you are in the book helps you remember what you're reading. And if it's just flowing, you don't have that part of it. Note-taking was a fascinating study that was done where they college professor, half of the room typed their notes. This half wrote their notes. Which had more comprehensive notes? The typers. More comprehensive. Which one had better long-term and short-term retention? The handwriters. The typers were stenographers. So they were capturing it, but they weren't processing it. When you're taking notes, you have to process to figure out what are you putting into this. And then also notebooks, like paper notebooks. And one of the things, working with both designers and architects, is that I started watching the fact that a lot of them had notebooks. And I learned to start putting my notes in a consistent thing. And I have fireboxes now going back 15 years where it's like they're part of my brain. They're in a firebox because when I'm doing research and writing something, I can go back and find this stuff. By the way, that is my mom there. Oh, she says hi too. So reading articles, I also mostly read them with pen in hand. I print them out because again, I want to capture, and if you see the articles I have piles of them at my house, and where again I'm engaging. However, I don't like reading on screens. And also, I much prefer books because there's been a lot more thought put into them. And a lot of these articles are just being put out there. But you get the zeitgeist from articles. What are we currently worried about right now? And you get people's hopes and fears out of articles. And then I also, on those articles, I put 5 dots, 4 dots, or 3 dots, ranking the value of them. If it's 2 or 1, those go away because there's just too much to click. I did recently buy, this is not an advertisement, but a Remarkable tablet. Because my eyes are not as good as they used to be, I can take articles offline and then adjust the font size, plus highlight with a pen. And I'm still, I only got this like 3 weeks ago. So I'm still kind of getting used to it. And I was taking notes in a couple of lectures today, and it really does have a feel of paper. What I'm finding is that I just get overwhelmed by the piles of paper. Again, visually, because I'll take them and I'll spread them out. And so I can see what that is. This one I have to code them with keywords. We shall see. This is about 1/2 of my library in my home. And research shows you don't have to read all your books. Just being around them makes you smarter. In part because you know it's there, you're nudging him. Hey, as I told my dad, because he was like when I was in high school, he was like on my case about buying books. I went, Dad, I could be buying drugs. And he kind of went, you're good. And one of my professors said that books were the cheapest investment you can make with the greatest return on value. Now, I also realize that a lot of people who are in the design realm are not necessarily book people. Architects tend to be, and I also will watch podcasts, but not as much. I'll listen to books. If I really like a book, I will also tend to buy the Audible book and listen to that as well, because I really am trying to absorb these ideas. I organize my books sort of, like there's a section up there on design, it's general nonfiction. At the top there, those are quotation books, because I'm a little bit of an addict on quotations. Art and design are down on the bottom. Dictionaries, in my office closet, I've got business, I've got creativity, I've got writing books. In the bedroom, it's fiction. But I try to organize it, and then every once in a while I have to go and rearrange them because I've bought so many books. Also, this is a little bookcase, mid-century bookcase that I refinished, and that's where I put the books I really like. The books that are capturing my attention. So again, it's sort of placement. The other thing is that I've got a really nice collection of Art Deco antiques, because when you travel, you got to do something with your extra time sometimes. You go to the museums, they get really upset when you try to walk out with their nice pieces. But it's amazing what I found just wandering through antique stores and even junk shops. And so it's the cabinet of curiosities idea is where our modern concept of museums came from, where individuals would just collect things and display, and just being amongst these ideas. When I'm writing or working on a speech, I create something and then I just wander around. And like there I've got a collection of barometers, which, you know, most of them are kind of Art Deco. The little round one is from the late 1800s. And it's just, you look at these things and just marvel at the beauty of them. But you wander through ideas, and it just gets you out of your own head to see what else is going on here. And sometimes you see something that's disconnected, but yet you go, oh, that reminds me of this. So I create on my Mac using Keynote, and then I print them out. So it's an iterative process back and forth. I print them out. I've got a total of this talk, the talk I did yesterday, I have a total of 5 printouts that I went through, and some of them are just covered in notes and highlights where I'm just writing back and forth, but I also then, I'll work on it and then I wander. So it's everything from, I'm condo president, so I have to manage that stuff. I make bread, I'll do other things just to distract myself. And when my oldest brother was in college, he brought home, I was in 6th grade, he brought home a book on the power of the subconscious mind. And as a 6th grader, I read this. And it basically said, put ideas and problems in your head and then forget about them, because your brain is going to work on them. And this has really been a nice thing for how my brain works. I really like, at times, just cutting them out and storyboarding them and moving them around. But again, the physicality of them really helps your brain understand what's there. Several people yesterday asked me about the graphics. And a lot of them yesterday were made with Midjourney AI, which is a ChatGPT app. And so you just put in there, drunken robot with booze bottles in a vintage illustration style. And then you get 4 samples, and then you can like upscale them or get variations on that. Use a lot of images that are vintage images that I find in antique stores and old magazines that are in the public domain. And then also, photographs from family. Here's part of the thinking that I also do. My presentations start out very technical and then move into sort of the practical aspects of life, where I'm bringing up things like how to think about the difference between fads, trends, and principles. Going from the momentary to the eternal. But like it's a photograph of spices. That becomes more personal. You can all relate to that. It's human. It tells us we're human. And then I quite often will end the presentation with things like that. So we go from very technical to very human. So I'm intentionally pulling people along on the path. Because when we get locked in our head about all the technology, we lose sight of the fact that we are people. And we need each other. And the interrelationships. But when I go from the threat of AI that could destroy humanity, or so we're told, to the idea that the future is something you hold in your arms. And many people came up and said, "You made me cry." But they didn't seem angry about it. I think they kind of liked it because, it's nice to know that we are human beings. You know about mind mapping? Basically, the idea, you take an idea and then you start branching out and adding different pathways of thinking. And this is what we learned. So I do have a master's in futures research from the University of Houston, real degree, real university. And one of the things we learned is that you sometimes have pathways that work. So the middle one there is best practices. Look, this is not rocket surgery. We know how to get this job done, but best practices often lose their color. They fade, they become boring. And if there's one thing we don't like, it's life to be boring. We will do almost anything to disrupt boredom. And so having those alternative futures, that sometimes these are the things that make us feel alive when we are challenged. On an iPad, I use an app called iThoughts HD to do the mind maps. This is how complicated I have been able to make them, where you just keep adding. And what I've tried to do is it organizes my thinking, where I'm trying to go, if this, then that. One of the problems I have as a presenter is that like in the movie Sixth Sense, little kid says, I see dead people. I see connections. And I see connections that a lot of people don't. Like on a Myers-Briggs, on the intuitive side, I am off the scale on intuitive. 0 on sensor. So I see connections, but one of my sort of, to break the fourth wall, one of my vulnerabilities is I assume that other people can make that leap. Architects tend to be very good at making those leaps. Recently spoke to a very technical engineering group. They didn't make as many of the leaps. This is interesting. So anybody have an Oculus headset? Okay. There is an app called Noda, which allows you to do mind mapping sort of in 3D space. I've tried it. I didn't like it because you can't see your notes. You can't see your books. The Apple headset, which is supposedly coming out next year, which allows you to integrate and it's sort of augmented reality where you can actually see that. That has interesting possibility. But the idea of putting up a bunch of ideas, particularly as a team, where you've got several people in there, and walking in amongst your ideas, of being able to see ideas in sort of a three-dimensional relationship, that is fascinating. I don't know if I'm going to buy one because I don't know if I can justify the supposed price, but I probably will. We've all been told to think outside the box. Don't. Stop it. It's a dumb idea. Think into other boxes. So I have a group of friends, and on Thursday night, it's the guys. We get together, and during the pandemic, my driveway was a space we could use, and so we would just spread out and we would just talk about stuff, and sometimes we just talk whatever. But we also have these things we would call think and drinks, where somebody had a design issue, because we're all involved with design. Everything from a design researcher, a guy who basically works construction at a design firm, a design professor at Milwaukee Institute of Art Design. Ben's a master carpenter, and then the guy taking the photograph is a designer of financial software. So when you go to an ATM machine, he's the guy that manages that for FIS. You see his work every time you go to an ATM. So it's all real fun, bright guys. And one time, one of the girlfriends came over, and she saw us all sitting there. They have those little round, mid-century modern things, and she goes, "Oh, it's the Knights of the Round Tables." So that became one of our nicknames. I wanted to get my kitchen redone, so it was, in the midst of not working during the pandemic, I hired an architect to design a kitchen. And 11 months later, it was going to go so far over budget, like twice what I had budgeted at the high thing. So I fired her, let her go, hired someone trained as an architect, but as an artist, and then she didn't want me interfering with her artistic vision, so Mark, the design researcher, who is trained to actually listen to people what they want, did a little research on Art Deco and Art Moderne, and one of the think and drinks, he showed me this drawings. What do you think about this? And so the photographs aren't great, but a 1987 condo, and basically we built an Art Moderne 1930s styled kitchen. And here's one of the things I do as a speaker. I learn a lot about the industry I'm speaking with. I attend the conferences I speak at. It's in the contract, they have to let me attend. And they're all like, why would you want to do that? So I can learn, so I don't have that sort of tunnel. So if you're going to be doing presentations, really get a good sense of what's going on with them. Hopes and dreams, the side conversations, the grumbles and the meta-grumbles. And I'm a real big believer in having knowledge of, where you get dirt under your fingernails. Knowing what the materials are. So when we were building the kitchen, I went with Mark, we picked up the steel. When the welder was putting it together, sometimes I was holding the pieces for him. I spec'd the countertops, the cabinetry, and I actually did the lighting. And it's not, it's not a perfect thing. Here's one of the fun things. Do you ever design something and you're having it built, and there's a mistake? Yeah. What was really fun was working through the mistakes, where Mark mismeasured some things, and the shelf was sticking out 1.5 inches, and he was like, he was going to sell his tools, he was never going to build anything again, he was just tired of it. Because when he started this, he wasn't working, and then he got a job. So he was basically doing both of these things. But it's the solutions you come up, the design process that was so fun, and my understanding some of what you go through helps me understand and speak to you. And that's when you're giving a presentation. Do you really understand who it is you're working with? Yes, they are. That is exactly true. And it was so much fun because, where the shelves were, we put little wooden medallions that matched the bracket of the shelves. And so they just covered up those gaps. And when people come in, they go, oh, I really love those. Ta-da! Did you ever see that? There's a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where Calvin's walking along and he's whistling, and there's a little rock there. He does a complete somersault, but lands on his feet, and then the last frame is, ta-da! So why a presentation on presentation skills? When I would speak to AIS or the like, I spoke to AIS chapter at University of New Mexico and participated in a crit. And the student did a video that, well, they never tested the technology. The lights, it was a brand new school, and the lights were either all on or all off in the theater. So I started out by saying, first of all, fix the damn lights. And then the guy wasn't well dressed, so he just had a t-shirt on, and it was all black, so it was a wide black and white shirt. So all I could see was these stripes walking back and forth. And it was too loud, he hadn't tested the technology, so the video kept stuttering. And so when it was my turn, I said, okay, this was interesting, this was good. But I pointed out some problems, and I said, I'm like the oldest guy in the room, which might mean I'm the guy with a checkbook. And if you've pissed me off, why would I write a check to you? And the next professor who stood up made a few comments, then turned to me and said, we teach design, not sales. Let me translate that for you. We don't really teach design here. We teach post-audience architecture. You have to have the connection. And so when I was speaking to AIS at Forum, I did programs on presentation skills. And one year, Mickey's wife, Diane, and then Shelley, Jeff Potter's wife, the three of us did a program on presentation. And it was not just presentation of ideas, it was presentation of self. You know, how do you dress? And we had there were supposed to be 100, we had over 200 people in that room. They were just glued because one of the things that students would continually say to me, why don't people tell us about this? Why don't we get this in our school programs? So I started doing this, and I've brought this up at a bunch of AIA events that we need an apologetics of design. Which apologetics comes from a theological point of view, but it is defense in which you believe. And it's the ability to defend 360 degrees. Because of automation coming, and because of the cheapness sometimes of clients and populations and what have you, you have to learn to defend that 20%. And when I was on the board, it was the year that we increased the number of HSW credits that were required. And my comment of why was, we don't need more HSW, we need more poetry. We need to teach art again. When I speak at AIA events, quite often at the state components, there's an art display from the members. Why? Because I don't think they get enough of a chance to express their artistic side. How to show up. So, have you all given presentations? When does the talk begin? I'm a futurist, not a telepathist. I need to hear. Yes? When you've arrived. It's a great answer. It's not the answer I'm looking for. Keep going. What else? When you start preparing, I'll get to that. That's actually a very good point. It's basically when you leave your room, you leave your office. In the sense of if you're a citizen architect, which I don't think means you've gone into politics. It means you are an active citizen in your community. But you, as an architect, are noticed. And so everything about you is part of the presentation. What's its ecosystem? What else is going on with them, with you, with the environment you're in? I heard this from a professional speaker probably 30 years ago. She said, show up fully prepared to be no place else. And that is one of the best pieces of advice you can get about being with others. And when you do this, you are no longer here. Marshall McLuhan said, when you're on the phone, you don't have a location. But we get sucked into this thing. And I'm not perfect at it, but I try never to be seen looking at my phone when I'm with clients. Because I want to be there with them. And this is just, this will still be there. Now, maybe if you have small kids, you do need the tether, but by and large, it's going to wait. And there's a great quotation I found along the way that said that throughout most of human history, most of the problems were solved before you ever found out about them. We hear about all these problems that we think we have to be engaged with and have an opinion about, and we actually have no influence. And so sometimes we just have to put it down, turn away, turn it off, and tune into something else. What do you think WWWDD stands for? We're in Orlando. What would Walt Disney do? One of their sort of marketing ideas is, when does your Disney vacation start? When you first think about going to Disney. And it's that slow pulling you in, and you go to the websites and see the possibilities, and it's the whole thing. I did a program one time for the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, and took my niece along, and we waited in line for over an hour. And it was just this mass of people, in these, I don't know what you call the little things where the queues. And so when I was doing the presentation, they're bored by the time they get to you. Can't you do things to engage them along the way, to entice them? Again, that graphic was from an old pencil box. And I just think, I love Art Deco because I think it was the last great design. Like, I love mid-century, but Art Deco had hope and optimism in it. Not everyone should present, very clearly. Some people are really good at it. There was a woman at AIS that I met that has a degree in architecture, but she said, I don't want to design, I want to talk about designs. And that's what she does for her firm, still 10 years later. She talks about, she helps translate it to the broader audience. Many people have natural strengths. They just, I'm sure Mickey was one of these people that just woke up when you were 5 years old and just started expounding, right? No? Not how it worked? Mike, maybe it was like, we're not going there. Did you get that pun? Where was I? Natural strengths, yes. So the first time, I've gotten, I think, reasonably good at this. The first time I gave a presentation as an adult was to a school of education at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I was sitting on the edge of a table, and I wrapped my leg around the table because my foot was doing this. And so it took a lot to get comfortable. And so, like, my first job, I joined Toastmasters. And you just develop comfort along the way, or you don't. But go with your strengths. Extroverts are overrated. How many introverts do we have in the crowd? Oh, yeah. And what's great is you raised your hand, Mickey raised his hand. A lot of leaders are introverts. Here's one of the things that I figured out very early on. When I go to a presentation, like I did a talk for the California Firefighters Association. I'm 6'3", and I weigh 200 pounds. And I felt small and tiny in that group. And these are people who, there's a fire, they run towards it. I scream and run away. But I always ask for an amiable host. Somebody that person knows everybody, everybody knows that person, and that quite often I'll ask for somebody who has a sense of humor. And then we go through the crowd and that person introduces me. Because if I plunged into a crowd and don't know anybody, I don't know what to say. I am an introvert. It doesn't mean I don't like people, it's just I like books better. But I like people if there's an excuse to talk. This, to me, has been gold. Find an amiable host. In Spanish, there's a word called querencia, and it basically comes from the bullfighting ring. And it's a place from which the strength of character is drawn, a place in which we know exactly who we are, the place from which we speak our deepest beliefs. When the bull comes rushing out, ready to fight, and the game is rigged, and the bull is going to lose. And it loses strength, and it begins to develop fear, and it retreats back towards that querencia. All of us find ourselves sometimes in that situation. But knowing who you are, knowing the core strengths, having that touchstone that when you feel threatened or when you feel uncertain, you go there. And then you can rise and fight again. Again, Junichiro Tanazaki's book, In Praise of Shadows. Sometimes when you're presenting, you can't be explicit about what you're trying to get people to think about. So one of the things I do is I hint along the way, but I want them to come to the conclusion on their own. It's all kind of a game we play. How do you get your ideas across? And sometimes, it's like letting the other person feel it was their idea. AV. So Wendy is back there. Hi, Wendy. So Wendy is the person I've been working with. If you're going someplace where there is technology, you show up at least an hour ahead of time to check things. And you would be amazed, or not, at how often there is a problem. And one time I did a talk, I was there 2 hours ahead of time, and we finally got the computer to talk just as I was being introduced. I did what's called, in a speaking business, there's something called a showcase, where you get to do like 10 minutes of your best stuff, and then there are meeting planners there to hire you. Went there, did all the tests, was introduced. My slide is up there, and as soon as I started talking, all of a sudden the screen just started doing this. And I had fun with it. I said, well, as you can clearly see here, and had people laughing, and the screen never got better, but I always have backups. I have backups in paper. I have it on a drive that is backed up both in Keynote, PowerPoint, and PDF. It's on my phone. My iPad is there. Paranoid? Who told you I was paranoid? But what happened is that I didn't panic, just like yesterday when the screen started going. People don't worry if something goes wrong. They watch you very carefully how you respond. And at that showcase, because I had fun with it and still delivered my talk, at the break, they brought me back up to say, this is how you do it. This is grace under pressure. And I ended up getting 20 bookings out of that thing just because I didn't panic. So it's that, again, that's cadencia. You don't panic. You know who you are. You know your stuff. And you go with it. Yeah, I think I covered that. But I refuse to put my talk on somebody else's laptop because I know it's mine. I have redundant adapters and my own remote control. Like, look at that. That is a cool remote. It's a Logitech. About 15 years ago, I took a 9-week course on improv theater. Comedy Sports, it's a franchise, maybe you have one in your city. Scared the hell out of me. And I'd been speaking for 15 years. But this puts you in vulnerability, and it makes you think on the fly. But one of the best sort of techniques is this yes and. Because something unusual is thrown at you, and you go, but. And in improv, you are taught yes, and you run with it. You do something with it. And you can train your brain to do this. One of the problems today, because we are very sensitive at times, and sometimes people are looking to be offended, improv is taking risks. And it's not that you're going to say something extraordinary or that offensive, but it slows the brain down to go, wait, can I actually say that? Write a wise saying and your name will live forever, somebody wrote. I love quotations. And one of my friends, one of the Knights of the Round Tables, he said, you keep quoting obscure people. Well, obscure to you, but to me, my dad, when I was in 8th grade, I was digging around his office and I found a pad of 3x5 cards with quotations, either written or taped that he found in like Reader's Digest. He used to do a lot of speaking. And he said, you will never be able to come up with all your own ideas. Learn from the mistakes of others and then look for ideas worth remembering. And it was a great inspiration. But what it does for me is it says, here are people much smarter than me who have said this thing. And you sort of like, you get to share the platform with bright people. Interruptions. Here's in the speaking profession, we say that 4% of the audience is there for one reason: to hate you. So there are 4% of the 100 or so people are here going, that was the worst. Do not try to cheer them up. That will just make them more mad. One of the things I always try to do is if I'm speaking in the morning, I ask to be at the reception the night before with the amiable host, and I meet people, and then you engage and you try to learn their names so that the next day you have allies. And so you can look out there and you can see people smiling because there's rapport. But that helps you. You don't look at the people who are scowling at you. However, one time I had this guy the whole time he was like, and afterwards he came up and he goes, that was the best damn speech I've ever heard here. So at AIA New Jersey, there was a guy who 5 minutes into my speech raises his hand and he starts asking questions. And it's clear the questions are not well thought out. So finally I said, okay, sir, we need to get back to the speech. Sir, please. And I started speaking. I said, sir, this is my presentation, not yours. The organization hired me to speak, so either hold your questions or you're going to have to leave. And the crowd broke into applause. And the guy was actually run out of the organization because he was clearly drunk and very unprofessional. But one of the things, you never lose your temper from the stage. I was at a showcase in Milwaukee one time where a famous professional speaker, his slides weren't with us. I'm old enough to remember slides. The carousel wasn't working, and he goes, if the AV guy doesn't fix this, I'm going to kill him. Never threaten death to anybody in the audience. Labash is landscape architect. I spoke to their student group, and they're all in tables, and I'm wandering the crowd as I'm speaking. All of a sudden, I come on one table, and there's like 20 beer bottles that are empty. And I'm like, oh my! And they hand me one, and I went, I'll get back to that. They were amiable drunks, and so it was real fun to play with them because they were not angry. They were having a great time. They were laughing. And it got the whole group. Sometimes you can engage, like you can engage the negative people. Sometimes you just pull them in, you let them have their say, or they get their little star, they get to shine, but they then become allies if you play it right. But when you're on the stage, you own the stage. It's yours. And you kind of have to have that sense of command while you're up here. I already talked about grace under pressure. Feedback. Your words were like poetry. I got 2 comments at a talk where 2 people said something about the poetic nature of my talk. Worst speaker I've ever heard in my life. There were 3 of those on the same evaluation form. Here's the cool thing. Same presentation for both of those. They're all there. And they say, this is my favorite evaluation I've ever gotten. I used to speak a lot of education groups. I was on a school management council. I ended up on a school board, again, where I got engaged with, in the 80s and early 90s, the majority of my clients were educators. And this 7th grader, they had to write me these little notes. And she said, I'm sorry I fell asleep in your talk, but you kept talking and talking. I couldn't take it anymore. Success leaves clues. So when you get evaluations, read them over, see what people are saying. Don't take any of them too seriously. You know, read your reviews, but not too seriously. And then people who get like Brene Brown, her husband had warned her, because she was, you know, became very popular on YouTube, do not read the comments. And of course, she read the comments, and then she said that like she didn't leave the house for 3 days because it was so devastating. And again, you know, like in this day and age where there are no filters and people can do stuff anonymously, you know, every once in a while I'll get, you know, somebody will send me something, and I'm like, really? And part of it is you have to go, you don't know what's going on in their world. So when doing a presentation, part of what you have to think about is, what do you want out of it? Do you want to be controversial? You're going to get the extremes of responses. You want to be trusted, which as architects, you probably want to have trust from your client. Recognize her talent. I don't ever respond to when someone says, you're a motivational speaker. No, I'm not. That's the rah-rah. I like being an inspirational speaker. I want people to sort of like feel good, but also feel comfortable and confident. If you read the book, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, like the book by Junichiro Tanizaki, this is a short book and just brilliant about when you try the creative act, there is resistance. And he says in there, it will beat your ass every time. And you have to still fight it. Norman Cousins, he said, no one knows enough to be a pessimist. Plans assume confidence, confidence assumes success, and quite often when you are presented with a question, you know, you'll kind of freeze up, but what that book tells you is you do know the answer. And when you build up that internal confidence, you just stop, and it's okay to pause and to think. And one of the ways to pause is say, could you restate that? Give it to me in another way. That gives your brain some time to process in the background. Mark Twain said, clothing makes the man. It's only half the quote. The other half is because naked people have had very little influence over most of human history. Dress and style for comfort. But the point is, it's the comfort of your clients. I've spoken to a bunch of like CEO roundtables where you could take all of my accumulated wealth that I've earned in the 66 years I've been on the planet, and they would go, meh. And these people, you know, you don't try to dress up to their level. I had a CEO one time show me his $15,000 diamond-encrusted Rolex. And it was a company that went out of business the next year. You know, sometimes there's pretensions that go on there. But there was a men's shop in Milwaukee that had the tagline, just enough attention, then forgotten. And one of the things when I found when I was working with AIS is the women knew how to dress. The guys had no concept of it. And one of the things that happened early in my life is I had a girlfriend or just a female friend who would take me shopping and they would dress me. Women love to do that. And I learned from them. And architects, you know, because you are about design, this becomes more important, particularly in the subtlety. In the speaking business, there's these, what we call peacocks, where it's the person who always has the hat or the person in the red tennis shoes. You know, and it's like that's their signature, and it's like, is that all you got? You know, it's the surface play. Unassuming elegance is really where it needs to go. Voice. You'll notice that I play with my voice. Raise it, lower it. If you want to get people to listen, you don't raise your voice, you whisper. Isn't that fascinating? We pay more attention to whispers than shouting. Modulated plays, learning to pace your breath, and how many of you get nervous before you go on stage? Okay. I was nervous yesterday. I wasn't nervous today, part because I knew that I now had friends and allies here. But breathe from the diaphragm. When we get nervous, we breathe from the chest, and that wears you out. That's a stressful thing. Breathing into your belly, it releases endorphins. It actually helps. And then, you notice I just said and I talk about silence versus the ums, is that you can train yourself, but you get help from others. Like if you're having conversations and you have a verbal tic, have them make a note of it. Just becoming conscious of those things really helps. Practice makes perfect, perhaps. Try first to be good, then unique. And I really wouldn't worry about perfection because we're humans and that's not in our programming. Mistakes can be endearing. I was speaking at AIA in Minnesota, and somebody pointed out that I had mistyped the word mistakes and hadn't noticed it. Nobody was upset. I wasn't upset. It was like, really? I've been using that slide for, however long. And then what was great is, so many Scandinavians up there, a woman came up. She was from, I think, Sweden. And she said, that's actually a cheese in our country. Becoming familiar, I keep working through. I will move a line. I will line things up. I will redo the shadows. I constantly am playing. I probably put 200 hours into the presentation yesterday. And it's not that it needed to be perfect, but it's how I learn it and it becomes my presentation. But it is, it's kind of that it becomes part of you. Familiarity breeds this, respect and comfort. And then the stonecutter's task is that idea that the stonecutter removes everything except the statue, the beautiful statue, and that's kind of what you have to do. And that is it. Thank you. I don't know if we have any time for Q&As.
I have a mic if anyone has a question.
Questions, comments, accusations?
I have a question, David.
Yes.
I know you're around a bunch of architects a lot. So here's the one time you can say it. What do we do wrong?
Talking?
I'm right here in the middle. What do we do wrong the most out of all this?
Pardon?
I know you're around architects a lot, and you've seen us present, and you're around us. What do we do wrong the most when we present?
What do you do wrong the most? It is probably being more empathetic. There's like that line about so many buildings are cold and unromantic, boxy without curves. People are losing interest in architecture, and you're not defending art. You're not defending the artistic aspect of it. And I constantly hear, well, it's not really our decision, the developers. But it's like, there again, that's why you need the apologetics of design, so you can defend that. Because Cameron Sinclair at the convention in 2013 said that the most sustainable building is a building that is loved. And you look at the, the Taj Mahal is the graphic that I use with that, because it was built about, for a dead spouse. We need to love our architecture. We need to see it. And I'm not seeing that defense. I want to see presentations at AIA conventions where you are talking about that. Because I'm told, well, it's so subjective. Not really. Beauty is not entirely subjective. There are measurable aspects to it, though there is a wide range of it. The other thing is, I think you're way too busy. And, like when I was working with the students, and they would open up to me. And, a lot of the young women were really worried about their lives. And I've known some of them now for 15 years, and their careers have gone great. And that's it. They don't have personal lives. And so how does the AIA help you better understand how to not be an architect, to be something else. So that you are engaged in the life like everyone else, or what have you.
Questions over here?
Anybody else?
Is this on?
Yes, it is.
In school, we're taught to make presentations. We present our own projects to juries and all that sort of thing. And this was wonderful. I want to commend you. But as I sit here and look around, I realize I'm in a massive 3-person firm, okay? And when we make presentations, they're personal to us.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'm the presentation guy. In the past, I have been the presentation guy who did all the production, and then a principal would go off and make the presentation. And I just wonder how can that be? How can that work? Putting a successful presentation together, or a good one, maybe you don't even succeed in getting the job, but a good presentation is a massive effort of coordination and message and spirit and soul about a project as it's coming together. And I'm asking the question to the room, and maybe we can discuss it over the next couple of days. How do big firms do that? Do you have presentation departments, marketing departments? How do they really know what you're doing in your designs and the drive and the spirit and the soul that you're trying to go after in your projects and the message and the relationships that you want to have with those clients? And conveying all of that, as was mentioned earlier today, in 30 minutes, the real estate in a 30-minute presentation gets really small, and you got to be really efficient. And it's just amazing what it takes to put a really good presentation together.
Yeah.
And the study of all of that. So I don't have a question really, just a statement and a wonder.
But here's an idea. So like when I would go to AIAS, 2 years that I wasn't even supposed to speak, but then somebody's plane got canceled. I was there to coach the candidates. So we would go off to the back of the room, some empty room, and they would practice with me. And then I would watch, and I usually have somebody else, but maybe a session or two on presentation skills. So it's one thing to listen to a guy who goes away, but who are the people that are really good in this organization? And then having them do some of this one-on-one coaching. There's lots of different ways to package a presentation. Like the buttons, that was just a idea that I thought of and started playing with it, but it's sort of in the speaking business, we talk about send aheads and leave behinds. So things you send ahead to get people thinking about your presentation and then something to remember. So again, it's like the presentation is not just that 30 minutes. It's the things that lead up, it's the follow through. And all of that can be better designed. Yes, we got a question here.
So when I've previously been taught how to be a presenter up front, and I'm one of those extroverts that should probably not be presenting, okay, because I get very nervous and, I think everybody else is smarter than me and I get very nervous up there. But I was always taught that you shouldn't really talk with your hands, right? And I noticed that you do.
Yes.
Almost every word that comes out of your mouth is, you've got a hand movement that goes with it.
The nuns made me sit on my hands.
Yeah, but so I'm getting, I enjoy your hand movements that go with your verbiage.
This is part of language.
I find it, I speak with my hands all the time.
I see that.
Right. But you look at David Muir on World News Tonight, and he has his hands almost in a position on his desk, and he does not move them at all. But who's right? and who's wrong, but teaching you
It's context.
how to present and what's good and what's bad.
Well,
and
and-
I guess I'm,
And
just
part of it is that you develop your own style that is from you. I would be basically limited if I had to do this. And I hated, if I always want a wireless lav because I do move around. And I've been described as a caged animal where I just pace back and forth. But to do this, you can't see me. And this, by doing this, and sometimes I will actually walk out into the audience, it reduces the distance. It makes me more human. And, because I'll be walking by and I'll suddenly go, hey, cool shirt, or, nice hat, nice boots, whatever. Yesterday, I was helping staff put the papers on the chairs. And I was one time told by a very senior professional speaker, you do not do that. You are the star. You are the professional. I'm like, no. I love being able to help the staff because I know how hard they work. But you do these things, there's all sorts of things that are a true expression of you, and being able to show that builds rapport.
Question here.
Hi.
Thank you for a great talk. Very inspirational, liberating in some ways. I wanted to ask you more of a clarifying question. When you learn about your audience, are there any specific type of things that you're looking for? Maybe besides being curious about the people that they are. Are there any specific things?
Well, one thing I always want to know if there was anything tragic that happened recently. I came to a talk, and they before I was introduced, we just want to let you know that so-and-so was killed in a car accident before, yesterday while coming to the conference. Now here's our inspirational speaker. And, you deal with that. But I have a very specific question. I want to know what keeps him up late at night and what wakes him up early in the morning. Hopes and fears. And then I always try to talk to other people in the group. That's why ahead of, the night before, I want to actually have conversations where I'm finding out what's going on. And I did a talk for this national insurance company, and I was asking the question about, hopes and fears. Well, I don't have any. It was a belligerent audience, and I was an interloper, and it did not go real well. I did get paid. But, so that's the thing is, I want to know, who's in charge, and I try to get a sense of the management style, because, one time I spoke at another insurance company, and the executives sat at the front table and talked with each other the whole time during my presentation. And it just, and you get a sense that, okay, this is not a company I want to work for. One time I did a presentation for the Wisconsin Electric. The president was up here and he was telling them how important it was to learn to think about the future. And he got up and walked out. Went from the stage and walked out. And everybody, it was like I was actually in the back, came up after it was introduced, but I just watched all the heads watching the president leave. So you look for the sense of culture, the sense of what else is going on here. Anything else? But one more.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, I was wondering, what about first impressions? First impressions. I
First-
believe you know a lot about body language, so you may tell a lot about it by meeting people, right?
Yeah, but you kind of have to look at people and listen to them, and it's so easy. Sometimes you'll meet somebody and you hear their name, and then it goes whoop. And so, trying to be present, and there are tricks that you can learn. That when learning somebody's name, you do sort of this little trick with it. But first impressions are important. I don't know about you, but I've often found that my first impressions were about me rather than them. Okay. Oh, we got one more. I don't know how we're doing on time. What's the, if there's something else coming up?
Nothing's after this. Trade show is open, but we are welcome to do questions as long as you're willing to stand here.
Oh, okay. We have a question up here.
Oh.
And wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you so much for your time. Very interesting. Because I think it's a very important topic about how to engage people currently, because it's so hard right now. Because, you know, humanity is moving towards what everybody wants to focus on what they want, right? And right now we have such an accessibility to exactly what we want, which is in the phone. So we lose that sense of touch with humans, because maybe we're just not interested anymore. And you're in this field where you have to constantly be engaging people in any way possible. And I just wanted to hear your opinion on how you see society moving forward with engagement, human engagement.
There's that again. So, like for instance, the buttons, because we're not sort of being open to strangers as much, and I did that without permission. So the only thing on the contract was my presentation yesterday. This I gave for free. The buttons I gave for free, because it is about how do we encourage people to have more engagement. The buttons created, I think, a lot of conversation out there. And so you look for that kind of thing because it's person to person, you know, that line about, you know, think global but act local. There is a certain aspect to that is very valid. And the idea of that, when I brought up at the end, when you break bread, you break barriers. So the important part of a conference are the breaks, are the meals, are the times. There was something in our brains that basically said that when I share food and drink with somebody, they are human. And we have to have more of that, you know, less of this. And it is frightening how these are engineered to seduce us. When you really start to read about the algorithms, you go, there's something potentially evil going on here. Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
All right. Thank you, David.
All right.
Is there more? Okay.
Thank you.